Hey guys, welcome into Sports by Brooks here on Fancred. Great to have you with us. Great to be on your phone or tablet. We got a wonderful community here on Fancred with your favorite teams. Dive in, interact. If you want to join me on the show, you can also interact by clicking on the fan line icon on the screen. And we're getting into areas where I think interaction and discussion with you guys is going to be something that we're going to be looking a lot more at. We do a lot of guests, but I want to get the viewers out there, you guys commenting and interacting. And the reason is I can learn something from you. Don't think that I can't. That's the great thing about Fancred. I mean, I was thinking about it today. It's unbelievable what Fancred is doing in providing this platform where we can, a great example, we've got Bobby Burak of the Big Lead coming up. And he's been breaking news about Stephen A. Smith's status. I talked about that on Friday a little bit, but Stephen A.'s contract's coming up. He's going to renew his contract, extend it, and it's going to be like a $10 million. We'll find out all about that from Bobby. That's nowhere in the media. Nobody covers that. And the other thing we're going to cover today, breaking news, is the college athlete endorsement compensation bill in Illinois was just endorsed by the Illinois governor, and it was voted through committee today. And Representative Chris Welch, who was on our show like 2 weeks ago and is part of the vanguard of getting athletes compensated for their own name, image, and likeness, he made these announcements. He got the endorsement from the governor, and we're moving forward now in Illinois. We covered Florida, right? Earlier in the week, we had, or maybe last week, I guess it was, last Friday, Darren Heitner, the lawyer who helped write the bill in Florida that would go into effect, similar bill, in 2020, and has also been endorsed by the governor. This isn't being covered anywhere. Is it important? Ask the NCAA, because the NCAA has called a meeting in Atlanta for today. And the board of governors, in other words, the presidents at the biggest schools, the best connected school presidents who are at the Power 5 schools, those guys, and the blue blood basketball schools, they're meeting in Atlanta as we speak to formulate. Now they're meeting ostensibly because we're going to develop a strategy to accommodate or whatever, evolve the situation with what's happening in California. That's the pretense. What they're really doing is behind closed doors, scheming in order to formulate a response to athletes being treated fairly. I mean, think about it. The only reason those dummies, the school presidents, are in Atlanta and generate, upwards of, eight figures for their institution every year. I mean, they're meeting in Atlanta to continue to block the people who are facilitating that, block the people who are facilitating many of the benefits in large part their fat salary as president of a major public or private institution. They're trying to block the people who are facilitating that. And they've been blocking those athletes from getting anything for 110 years through the NCAA, right? But remember, here's a key point to remember with this compensation for athletes through endorsements. That money is not being paid by the schools. You're not asking the schools to do anything, right? Yet you would think this was the apocalypse. I want to do something else. I mentioned our producer, Cam Smith, is with us every day. And Cam, I just want you to know, we talked about these clips and we're going to run them. I think we're going to wait with the news report that we have on this subject. Some unbelievable comments by an athletic director on a local news report that came out this week that I'm going to show you and discuss. You just won't believe it. And now you're if you're watching this show, you're probably pretty well educated on this subject of college athletes being compensated. And the whole issue right now, just to reset it, the compensation is not coming from the schools here. The law that was passed in California that may never go into effect because it doesn't start until 2023. That's another thing, right? That law is to facilitate a third party from paying to facilitate a third party sponsor to pay a player. So whatever it is, a car dealership wants to run a billboard with a college athlete, you can do that and that athlete gets compensated like every other human being. Just treat us like a human being. I don't think it's too much to say that at this point, especially in the context of the freedoms that we have here in the United States. It's that much more stark, brazen, embarrassing. And I haven't even brought up the demographic issue of the athletes who are being affected by this. So, so the NCAA is meeting, and here's the thing. I'm like you. Look, if I wasn't really invested in the situation, if I hadn't done my best in many ways to tear down college athletes in football and basketball in the past, I've done a lot of reporting on so-called illegal activity by college athletes. The best example being Reggie Bush, that you probably know, taking illegal benefits, violating. They make it sound like Reggie Bush was violating the law. And of course, now it's gone to the next level with NCAA violations, with the FBI getting involved. The FBI, right, should be investigating the NCAA. The FBI should be investigating the Board of Governors who are meeting in Atlanta, not investigating what Adidas is doing or what an assistant coach is doing who is being scapegoated by the NCAA, diversionary tactic to allow for the injustice being perpetrated on all college athletes. You can't benefit from your name, image, and likeness. You're a good enough player or in a good position, a good situation. Somebody wants to pay you to endorse their product or service, and you're not allowed to do that? What? But the organization that exists because of your labor, they get to benefit off your name and your likeness, right? They can sell items with your name on it, no problem, right? Again, I watch ESPN. I mean, it's so brazen. I mean, this is all a function ultimately of the television networks. But I'm watching ESPN, and they're doing features that they're tweeting out of college football players. A single college football player, they'll do an interview, Tom Rinaldi piece. And they'll have a sponsor underneath, tagged on Twitter, the sponsor account, like it's like, here is a profile of Joe Burrow, right? And then underneath they'll have Mobil, the oil company, tagged in that tweet. And Joe Burrow doesn't make a dime off of that. Think about LSU football. Think about the amount of money that's being generated and why. I mean, these are basic things I understand, but people need to be not reminded because no one's even thinking about it. That's the issue here. It's endemic. And that's what the NCAA is trying to maintain. That's why they're mobilizing here. That's why they're being somewhat as deferential as the NCAA has ever been. The other thing is, I should always do this at the outset. The NCAA is the schools. All right. So that board of governors, I got to find out who the current board of governors is for the NCAA. Those are college presidents, from let me find out who they are. I think it's important to know who they are, by the way. We should know who they are. They should be held accountable for what's happening. Let me find the roster. There's another thing going on with a committee at the NCAA I'm going to tell you about in a second. Let's see. Where is the, let me see here. All right. I'm looking for the roster, and it's, what a surprise, extremely difficult to find exactly who currently is on the Board of Governors. You have got to be kidding me. Unbelievable. All right, let me, one more time here. Okay, I can tell you at least 5 members of the Board of Governors. Mary Sue Coleman, who is the president of, let's see, American University. All right, I've got to find a list of this. I want to focus on the student committee that the NCAA is using to try to push back on ironically, push back on college athletes being compensated for their name, image, and likeness. There's a student committee that the NCAA brainwashes and utilizes to come out in public and say, no, 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 don't compensate college football or basketball players or any of us. That committee is made up of 28 current student athletes. And of those 28 student athletes who have come out with a statement today on the NCAA website, this is an NCAA-sponsored organization, NCAA athletes, 28 of them have come out today pushing back against compensation for name, image, and likeness of college athletes, which, by the way, doesn't come from the schools. The schools aren't even paying the athletes. It's a third party, right? Of those 28 current NCAA athletes around the country, 1 is a college football player at a Power 5 conference, and he plays for Rutgers. Says it all. What a coincidence. So we'll get back to the subject. We've got some video we want to show you, some outrageous video that came out this week involving an athletic director spewing nonsense about this issue of compensation that is the reason for her job at this school. And I'll show you that coming up. But first, we're going to go out and talk to Bobby Burak of the Big Lead, thebiglead.com, the Big Lead on Twitter. And Bobby Burak is also, of course, on Twitter. And let me get that specifically, because I know he has like an underscore. It's Burak, B-U-R-A-C-K, Bobby, one word, underscore. What's going on, Bobby?
Yeah, Brooks, it's not the best because I prefer it just being Bobby Burak. That underscore and last name first makes it kind of awkward and a little bit embarrassing.
Now, wait a minute. It's so funny you bring that up, because I literally was going to ask you, what's going on with that underscore? But did you try to do Bobby Burak just at the beginning and it didn't work, or what happened? Or you just screwed it up?
I don't know who. If you type in at Bobby Burak, nobody shows up, but that username's unavailable. I don't know if you can use some of your connections to try to, charge them to let me switch it, because, again, having that underscore, I don't think it's doing me any good.
Right. Well, somebody is benefiting from your name. You're like a college athlete, right?
I wonder if just how big do you have to be to just go by your first name? Like how much would I have to elevate to be at Bobby?
The person who can do that is the person in life who is never early and they're never late. You're always happy to see them. When you're just one name, that's what that means. It's like the president. The president is never early. He's never late. If you're on time and he's late, you're late, right? So, but Bobby, you've been on top of this Stephen A. Smith situation, and you do a great job across the board. I mean, the reason that we're having you on right now is you do such a great job covering sports media. In fact, there's not many people covering it in the way that you do it specifically, and you've been doing it a long time. And so this is not a situation where it's a one-off. You do it every single day on thebiglead.com and on your Twitter. So what have you found out about the future of Stephen A. Smith?
Well, first of all, I appreciate those kind words. So here's the latest on Stephen A. Smith. He signed a 5-year extension with ESPN that's going to take him through 2025. He had 1 year left on his contract. That final year is going to be adjusted. So as far as ESPN fans, they're still going to get Stephen A. on First Take every day with Kellerman from 10 to noon, but he is going to be leaving his radio show. That 1 to 3 Eastern time is going to be opening it up. He's going to be doing, which we reported about a couple of months ago, he's going to be taking over the Wednesday pregame NBA show. And it's called Sports Center with Stephen A. because the NBA won't tell you this, but they don't want their name associated with Stephen A. Smith. That's actually why he's not on at halftime at Scott Van Pelt. So he's going to be doing that. But again, he's leaving the radio show, but he's going to be there until 2025. And I think we can put to rest any chance of somebody overtaking him as the face of ESPN until then, because that NBA pregame show is big for him. He's still going to be on Sports Center and Get Up, although not quite as much. And also an ESPN Plus presence could be in the works.
What's the story with the NBA attempting to distance itself? How ironic when you're talking about the biggest personality, best known personality, perhaps. I mean, you got Scott Van Pelt. There's a few others, right, in that neighborhood, but certainly he's at the very top, and African-American and a big fan of the league. What's the NBA thinking?
Well, they've been blocking him from going on NBA Countdown for a while now. My former boss, Jason McIntyre, reported that, I believe, all the way back in 2013. And my sources have been telling me it's been the same thing every year since. Stephen A. Smith has wanted on the NBA pregame show, but the NBA does not want it. It's a combination of a couple of things. One is him threatening Kevin Durant didn't set well with the league. Now, you could say he didn't threaten him. He kind of did. I mean, you can argue it all you want, but he's either one wanted to fight Kevin Durant, or two was going to reveal some information Kevin Durant didn't want to. It was a threat. And also the NBA is a little concerned about him being too pro player at times, and they don't think that would be best for him. But
ironic.
Yeah, it's the NBA though. I mean, well, again, if you call the NBA, they'll tell you, "Oh no, we don't block talents. We'll let anybody on." That's not true. They did it with Stan Van Gundy a couple of years ago, and they've done it with Stephen A. now for a long time.
Is there any, and I'm sure you probably mentioned this, but I haven't seen it. Is there anybody specifically within the NBA organization that is responsible for blocking Stephen A. Smith from being on NBA Countdown?
I haven't heard any specifics. I've just been told it's the NBA league, whoever that can assist of. But don't forget, Brooks, this is a big deal because what's Colin Cowherd doing on Fox? He's on Fox's pregame show, so he's on Big Fox. Rachel Nichols now is going to be on NBA Finals coverage, which airs on ABC. Being on those broadcast channels, that's a big deal. And it's likely Stephen A. is never going to be able to be on ABC. He's going to stay just on ESPN's presence. For someone like Stephen A., that's arguably the biggest star in the business, he's never going to top Colin in that category. He's not going to top Nichols. And those are two people that I consider his competition to be the best and best known personalities in the entire business.
Dude, this is, and boy, am I late to the party on this, but visiting with Bobby Burak, sports media oracle from thebiglead.com, and they broke the news about the problem between the NBA and Stephen A. I'm not so sure it's on Stephen A.'s side of it, but he's not been participating in the high-profile NBA coverage on ESPN, as you just heard Bobby detailing. So now, from your reporting, we come to understand that adds a lot more spice into the fact that they're going to put Stephen A. on what you mentioned Wednesdays for his own special little NBA corner. Isn't that kind of a middle finger to the NBA by ESPN management?
You know how you're accounting every tax season finds those little loopholes? That's what this is. Sports Center with Stephen A. Smith, not NBA Countdown with Stephen A. Smith. This is an ultimate loophole. And kudos to ESPN for getting him on, because I think that show is going to be a rating success.
No, wait, but I still don't. So this is really an amazing story, and I think it's getting underplayed. And now that you're telling me about it, and we've provided this context here, I think is it too much to say that this might be an indication of the relationship between ESPN and the NBA? that maybe it's not all balloons and lollipops? Because
Oh
I
no,
mean, I hate to interrupt you, but here's an example of what I mean. The ESPN would never do something like this with the NFL, right? Would they? With a personality?
not now, because they're trying to get back in the NFL's good graces now with Jimmy Pitaro, John Skipper not there. No, I think the NBA and ESPN have a great relationship. I mean, look at the way they cover the NBA. Does any league get more cheerleading coverage than how ESPN gives the NBA? I mean, these guys don't want to criticize the league at all. I've been on this for a year now. If there's a negative NBA story, these guys, they try to spin it faster than anybody could even break it down. I mean, they do not want to say anything negative about the NBA. I think it really has just to do with the NBA not wanting Stephen A on their bumper coverage.
So we're now visiting with Bobby Burek of thebiglead.com. Great information here. And that's why this show, Bobby, exists, because we're doing this every day now. All the things that we see on Twitter, the waterfall on TweetDeck, and you're like, damn, where can literally, Bobby, the germ of this show is the thought in my mind when I see those things. I literally still have a reflex where I pick up my iHeart app on my phone and say, where can I listen to somebody talk about this? Because all we get is what's going on with the NFL games, what's the latest in the NFL gossip, that's in the NBA gossip, all that stuff. We don't get any sort of stuff like what you guys are doing, and of course, what I've been doing for a while. And that's why this show exists. It's not that we're talking about niche stuff either. It's just there's a perception that it might be niche because nobody covers it on ESPN, but it isn't. There's an audience for it, and that's why we're doing this. And so I want to ask you, though, about the situation right now with NBA Countdown. Michelle Beadle departs. She's now gone from ESPN, having been bought out, and now you've got Maria Taylor, you've got Rachel Nichols. It's still a little fuzzy how they're approaching that NBA coverage. Is that because Stephen A is still coming in? I mean, what's your perception of that coverage right now and the personalities that are involved in it?
I watched Friday when they debuted the new one with Maria Taylor, Jalen Rose, Paul Pierce, Jay Williams, and Adrian Wojnarowski. The show's certainly better. They were really struggling with Michelle Beadle. I don't know exactly if it was chemistry, some off-the-air stuff. That show was not good, and it was not even really worth watching. There was no new nuggets, really no entertainment. It was just really a dull show leading into NBA pregame show. Brooks, we just talked about Stephen A. Smith arguably being the face of sports media. If I had to bet, the person that's going to overtake him one day will be Maria Taylor. I think she's fantastic. No matter where she is, I think she makes every show better. So I would disagree some that the show isn't extremely better. I think it's significantly much more enjoyable just based on that one episode. I think Maria is going to make this show a must-watch weekly. And Woj, nobody dominates a beat like he does. If he's on air, we're watching and we're paying attention. And likely the blogs are aggregating it.
I 1,000% agree with you on Maria Taylor. I think one of the issues with her is they want her everywhere. I mean, she is everywhere.
Yeah.
Unbelievable schedule, extremely physically taxing. And so she might not be, my perception might be borne out. It's, first of all, part of it is kind of me coming to grips with the changes that they're making, right? And then the other thing is Maria was maybe not quite as sharp initially when the season kicked off, but she's got such a ridiculous schedule. I think ESPN probably should think about cutting back on that schedule and just zeroing in on things because, having her out at game day, out in the crowd and doing all those things, I know that's a flagship property, if not the flagship property for ESPN. Very important. But they've got to make some decisions, I think, to give her a chance to be the best that she can be because that show is going to kick ass, once she gets rolling.
Yeah, and to be that deep into both college football and NBA, that's pretty rare. Stephen A. Smith's been all over ESPN landscapes the past 5 years, but he's essentially just been covering the NBA outside of the general topics on his shows. She's now doing it for two sports. A lot of people can't do that. You point to Chris Mannix doing it for the NBA and boxing. I mean, how many other talents are that deep into two sports? Nobody else comes to mind.
We're visiting with Bobby Burak of The Big Lead, and we're talking about Stephen A. Smith, Maria Taylor, the things that nobody else is talking about on shows. Doesn't matter if it's ESPN, Fox Sports, NBC, CBS, Fox Sports Radio. Nobody is talking about this stuff, and there's a big audience for it, and that's why we'll continue to do it here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. So you talked about something caught my eye in your coverage of the Stephen A. Smith situation, and that's radio, ESPN radio. Stephen A. Smith does a daily show, weekday show, 2-hour show, right? And it airs on the owned and operated ESPN stations in the monster markets of ESPN radio. Will Cain comes on right afterwards, and there was a big shakeup. And I mean, it's a big shakeup, Bobby, because I used to be on one of these shows for several years. On ESPN LA, the 710 AM station in Los Angeles, the ESPN radio station took off Mason and Ireland, which is a midday show that's been airing for 25 years, middays in Los Angeles. And ESPN radio is the home of Mason and Ireland. I used to be on that show for several years. They took that show and bumped it to Afternoon Drive and brought in Will Cain, and they're now airing his 3-hour show middays in the second biggest media market in the country. That's big news. Then they bump George Sedano to evenings. And from my perspective, I like both of those shows, Sedano, Mason and Ireland. I don't know if it was a mistake, but it just sucks not having that old hat that you could listen to every single day at the same time. I do think that they're selling George Sedano short. But perhaps based on some of your coverage involving Stephen A. and his radio show, could we see a guy like Sedano perhaps move into that slot? I mean, what do you foresee happening now that you've reported that Stephen A. is no longer going to be doing that national radio show?
The belief around the industry is that if Max Kellerman wants Stephen A's radio spot, it's likely his job to lose. It's in LA and New York. As you mentioned, those are two markets that Kellerman knows as well as anybody in the business, but he might not want it, and ESPN could elect to go local in New York, and that would likely move Will Cain to Stephen A's slot. It'd probably be 1-4. So then you have to look, could Sedano take over Will Cain's spot, which would become 4-7 nationally? To me, that's the move if you're ESPN. You mentioned Will Cain going to LA. I think Will Cain is fantastic. ESPN's radio lineup is kind of moved away from traditional radio and some of the more digital appetite. I think they play too much towards social media. Will Cain is an old school radio guy, and I think he does solo sports radio as well as anybody outside of Colin Cowherd. I think it was a great move. To me, that's the future of ESPN radio. So Will Cain deserves that. By the way, his ratings are up massively, affiliates, all that. It's been a major success as he took over on terrestrial radio. So I had to guess right now, I would say Will Cain takes over from 1, then they move it to 1-4. As far as that PM drive slot, I have not heard any names, but nobody makes more sense than Sedano. You're right. His ratings were solid. Doing drive, and he got bumped. And he's a very talented guy. He covers the NBA very well for the network. To me, that's the move. But again, it is predicated on how interested is Max Kellerman in that job. Because if Kellerman wants that radio spot, it's hard to tell him no because it's in LA, it's in New York. Kellerman's a big name, and also a lot of people might not remember he did radio. And I
was just going to say that.
If you want to break it down, Max Kellerman on radio, that's as good as it gets.
Yeah, it is. And I'm so glad you're here, man, because I've got somebody else to talk about this stuff with on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. And we're covering this stuff almost every day, but you are plugged in, obviously. So I want to push back a little bit with Will Cain in terms of his show. I've gone off on Will Cain in the past because although I think he's an extremely talented guy, obviously, he's carrying his own show. He does television, he does the fantasy, does First Take. He's all over the place. But the thing about his show, his radio show, that makes it hard for me to listen to, and I want you to push back on me if you don't agree or say whatever you want to say, and it's not so much his fault. But this might be him, it might be ESPN, whatever. But he plays into that embrace debate ecosystem, right? So if you're not watching First Take, or you're not watching or listening to Will every day, and you drop in, there are hours where he's taking calls from people referring to his take a week ago, or, I'm not saying he's not setting it up, but it's kind of an inside ecosystem thing. And that's really germinated from the way ESPN does it during the day. So it's not necessarily a criticism of Will. I just wish he could break out of that and not necessarily play into that. But for all I know, that's why he's got good ratings. What do you think?
I don't see it like that at all.
Okay.
You're right. When Will's on First Take, he embraces debate, quote unquote, just like Skip used to do with Stephen A. Because I don't know Max Kellerman and Stephen A. don't air. Will and Stephen A. do. I don't find Will Kane like that on radio at all. I think he's a blend of Colin Cowherd and Dan Patrick. He has the solo rants of Colin Cowherd where he really goes in deep, makes a lot of analogies, but he also just kind of has that guy talk, that sports talk where he talks to his producers. They have fun. Maybe when the callers call, they want to debate, but to me, that's more in the callers. I don't think Will at all is looking to just, have an outrageous take on radio. I think his callers are sometimes bothered by him by nature because he is different than most people on air. He has different views. I think they're the ones that push back at him, which leads him to debating. But I don't think the philosophy of that show is at all what you would consider Brace Debate with Stephen A. Smith, Skip Bayless, Max Kellerman, Shannon Sharp.
You got to come down to LA and be in a studio with me when you're here. I don't know. Where are you based at?
Michigan.
Whenever you're in LA, come down, because
absolutely
the things that you're saying, we don't agree on most stuff. But man, I really want to hear, because you're extremely well informed and an aficionado of this whole business. And so I want to offer you my response. And I want to ask you about Max Kellerman, interesting statement that you made there, visiting with Bobby Burack of thebiglead.com. It's Burack Bobby, Burack Bobby, one word, _ on Twitter. And so
as of right now, though, we don't know long term.
So don't memorialize that. So when you're talking about, you were talking about Will Kane, the key, I think, as a guy who did talk shows, I'm doing one right now, and I've hosted sports radio talk shows for 25 years. The one thing I think to keep in mind, and I think that does kind of interface with what you're saying, is they control those callers. They control every single thing that's going on. They're not choreographing it, but we both know that much of what Embrace Debate entails is staged. I'm not saying they're lying or making stuff up or giving you a view they don't really believe, but it's planned out in advance. It should be planned out in advance. But but here's the thing: when I've dealt with consultants, particularly in radio, when I've done radio shows, I was doing I did Kirk Herbstreit's afternoon drive show with him. I co-hosted his afternoon drive show for 3 hours a day in Columbus for a couple of years. But I'm not referring necessarily to that show, but just to give you an example of my experience. But of course, consultants come in all the time and talk to hosts. And the number one thing you're going to hear from a consultant to someone who's doing a radio show is build conflict. Do it naturally. Don't contrive conflict, but build it. And I think that's something that Will and all radio hosts do to a certain extent. But since it's solo with him, he does it through guests, good-naturedly, right? And with the callers. And my whole point about this situation, Bobby, is if I'm not invested into that all the time, right? And I drop in once in a while, as radio listeners tend to do, there's kind of a disconnect. That's fine. I understand that. But I what I'm saying about his show is he's a very talented guy, but I think a lot of the things that happen on his show are accounted for in advance, and the callers are being screened to a certain extent to create that. And dude, I'm not a P1 on that show. Who's to say, I mean, if I'm not a guy listening every day, sorry, Brooks. That's too bad. Now, you mentioned Max Kellerman. Very interesting statement. You said that he doesn't gel with Stephen A. And I think that plays into what I just said, Bobby, earlier about conflict, right? And so, but what I'm asking you is now, specifically with Max, do you think that conflict that you're perceiving with Max is something that is good for the show, or do you think it's something that's not good for the show that might drive away viewers?
As far as viewers go, I don't think it matters because people are tuning in that show for Stephen A. It could be Stephen A versus Max, Stephen A versus some guy off the street.
Bum of the Month Club
Are going to be solid, but I don't think the show's very good right now because, for one, I just don't think Max and Stephen A have any chemistry. They don't even seem to like each other. If you just watch their facial expressions, this seems like these debates are heated. They don't seem to respect each other, especially on social issues. Like when Max is breaking down social issues, Stephen A does not seem like he's interested in hearing Max's take, and Max doesn't seem like he thinks Stephen A's smart enough to hear his take.
Here's the thing. That's amazing, man. My big question is, and I'm not saying you're not right, and I think there is something to what you're saying. I think the big question is, does ESPN view what you just said as a positive, right? Yeah, they're uncomfortable. Wow, I got to tune in. What's going to happen today? Is he going to disrespect him today? Right? Now, when you look at Skip and Shannon, that's kind of a superficial thing between those two guys screaming at each other. But it's really like, and Rob Parker and Chris Broussard are very much like that. Very underrated, I think. Have you listened to that show on Fox Sports Radio?
I have.
Dude, that's a great show. They're doing it, I think, the way Embrace Debate really should be done. And Rob Parker is such a likable guy. He's such a guy that it reminds me of somebody that you would want to hang out with. And he's just deferential enough, to make it work perfectly. But go ahead.
You talk about somebody that seems to just be shooting for the stars with takes. That's Rob Parker to me.
Right. He shoots for the stars with takes. I love Rob Parker because he's the guy that if this is something he'll drop in about once every 6 months. Like if you're a Browns fan right now, you should file a class action lawsuit with all the other fans. Why not? With the Dolphins. Yeah. But he'll throw things in there like that. But there's just something about that where he can get away with it for whatever reason with me. I think it's because I just like him so much. He's just a magnetic personality. But in the show on FS1 between Skip and Shannon, there's an undercurrent of good naturedness. And those guys, at least they get along, they seem to, or what do you think?
Yeah, I do. Skip handpicked Shannon, so obviously he wanted him on that show. I think their relationship personally, while it's not Mike and Tony's, of course, or Michael and Jamal's Big Cast PFTs, I think it's much better than what Stephen A and Max have off the air.
Right. So my point is that it seems that, people want everything to be authentic, right? Well, this Embrace Debate thing Jamie Horowitz is grounded in conflict. That's the whole thing, debate. Yeah. And so what you're saying to me is that what Max and Stephen A are going through is really the most legitimate conflict there could be, but does it cross the line, you think?
Well, I think the issue is that Stephen A's at his best when he's playful. Like when somebody says something outrageous, he can blow up or troll them when it's the cowboy topic. With Max, he often seems bored and frustrated. And to me, that's not the interesting Stephen A. The Stephen A at his best is like when Michael Irvin's on and he's blowing up at Michael Irvin, or what he did with Skip, or what he does with Will. Damian Woody, he's very good with. I think with Max, he takes it so personal. Not only is he not interested, he just comes across as unlikable.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Wow.
I think the way Stephen A is with Max is unlikable. I think it's disrespectful to Max and the audience. And to me, it's actually turned me away from even watching the show, because to me, it's like, dude, you're on TV talking sports. Why are you taking it so seriously?
Like Max is. So you're saying Max, is this undercurrent then political with him, or just the way what's going on in the country, or is it a function of his personality?
I think, as you mentioned, these shows are better when people are animated, and I don't think Max is as willing to fake it, quote unquote, as others. I think he's just as real as they come. Now, he might push it a little bit on some Tom Brady topics. I mean, I think he's kind of halfway joking there. But when it comes to social topics, Max Kellerman's arguably as good as anybody in the business at breaking those down. And Stephen A. Smith does not seem comfortable on set when Max is doing that.
One last question for you, Bobby, and definitely want to have you back and chop
Absolutely.
it up some more. This is outstanding. One last question. You know what? We don't have enough time, I think, because we've got another guest right up against it, and I think it's going to be something where I want to give you some time to respond to it. So why don't we just have you back and where we can kind of do more of a long form thing when we get that opportunity. I can't thank you enough for coming on, and look forward to doing it in the future. And best of luck with the website and your Twitter feed and that Twitter handle.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, if you can pull some strings for me, I don't know how close you are with the Twitter guys, but I think I'd be much better off at Bobby Burak instead of Burak Bobby.
You have to think of like a nickname or something, like a branding thing, right?
Yeah.
Stephen A. Smith's just Stephen A. It should be Stephen A. as his handle. I mean, you got to think of the BB or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah,
work on that. Get your agent on that.
I might have to, because like I said, not only is it lame, I'm ashamed to even share that Twitter handle right now.
Yeah, say it out loud. Thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Brooks, thanks, man.
That's Bobby Burak of thebiglead.com. And coming up, we've got another guest coming up, Zach Cox. And so I wanted to give Bobby a chance to say goodbye without kind of overlapping what's going on with the show. But that was some great stuff. And now we're going to be talking NFL trade deadline and NFL trade deadline as it involves a team that I think could be more involved than people realize. A team with a lot of issues swirling around it, despite the fact, looks like all is well. Let's bring up Zach Cox now from Nesson out in New England and Boston to talk about the New England Patriots and the trade deadline, what's going on with the Pats. I can't thank you enough for coming on such a busy day. Thank you so much, Zach.
Yeah, not a problem. Yeah, definitely one of the busier days. It's been pretty calm so far, but we still got a couple hours left before this trade deadline, so plenty of times for stuff to get crazy.
I don't want to take up any time here. What's going on with the Patriots in the trade deadline?
Well, they already made one trade, or two trades, I guess, last week. They brought in Mohamed Sanu from the Atlanta Falcons for a second-round pick, a move that I think everybody has kind of anticipated for a while, the fact that Mohamed Sanu would eventually wind up with the Patriots. He's a Rutgers guy. Bill Belichick loves Rutgers guys. His skill set is really one that kind of everybody believed would fit in well with the Patriots, and I think it will fit in well moving forward. And then the Patriots also booted away Michael Bennett down to the Dallas Cowboys. That's a late round conditional pick. I think it's a 7th that could turn into a 6th. So pretty much a situation where he just didn't really work out here, and trading him allowed them to free up, I believe, close to 2 space. So it seemed like a move that was kind of for both sides. So we'll see if they do anything else today. There was a report from Jay Glazer, who's usually pretty plugged in with this kind of stuff, that they're still in the wide receiver market even after acquiring Mohamed Sanu, which is a little surprising to me. I would be a little surprised if they did add another receiver, just because they do have their first-round draft pick, N'Keal Harry, is eligible to return from injured reserve this week. So they seem to be pretty well positioned at that spot. But I mean, knowing the Patriots, there's always a possibility they add another name there.
One of the greatest questions of the age, I think, is what happened with Josh Gordon? And we're having this conversation about wide receiver. What happened?
Yeah, it seems, I mean, I haven't heard anything that suggested it was any kind of off the field stuff that nothing in the sort of realm of what he dealt with for a lot of his career with the suspensions and the substance abuse and everything like that. I haven't heard anything to that effect. I think it was just a fact that he was dealing with the injuries. He battled through a bunch of injuries this season. And just the fact that he wasn't quite as productive as he has been in the past, wasn't quite as reliable, and from an on-field standpoint, his catch rate was pretty low. He was making a couple plays. He did have a couple kind of highlight reel Josh Gordon catches, but overall he just wasn't the same type of player that he was even last season and especially earlier in his career. And I think the Patriots just viewed it with N'Keal Harry, who has a similar skill set, potentially coming back this week. I think they viewed it as a situation where his roster spot would be more beneficial served elsewhere, which is a little bit of a surprise. Was a little bit of a surprise to a lot of us here in New England, just the way that it was sort of an abrupt end to his Patriots tenure. But apparently they just viewed, they wanted to move in a different direction with that.
Total outsider, just as an aside, when you look at them and what they did with Antonio Brown, to me, that speaks to the pragmatic nature of Belichick. And so I would be more likely to lean to Gordon's just not getting separation the way he used to, or that there's some on-field thing going on, or maybe there's not necessarily a commitment to the system or being on time, whatever it is. But I think it probably is leaning towards performance, because if you're going to sign Antonio Brown, you're a performance guy. So that's my thought. So I think one of the really intriguing things going on with the Patriots, and maybe it isn't anymore because he signed with Fox to do television, the tight end situation. And here we are at the trade deadline, and that's a problematic position for the Patriots. But the elephant in the room is Gronk. What are your thoughts on how all this is going to play out?
I would be, at this point, stunned if Rob Gronkowski comes back this season. I still wouldn't rule out a potential return next year, maybe. But if he kind of gets that itch during the offseason, that's everything that he's talked about during all these this kind of media tour that he's been doing over the last couple of weeks. He needs to have that itch and that desire to come back and play football. He doesn't have that at this point. It's not surprising, really, given the kind of punishment that he endured for the Patriots over the last 10 years. He plays one of the more physical positions in football, and he's so good and so big that guys just had to basically hit him in the knees for 6-7 straight years. And that kind of wears down on a guy who's gone through a lot of surgeries and a lot of kind of health-related issues and injury-related issues. It's not surprising to me that he's not kind of in a place where he wants to come back. It's also not surprising to me that he hasn't totally shut the door on potentially coming back, especially because it is sort of in the kind of industry that he's in now with the CBD endorsements and all that. It's in his best interest to keep the door open and say, look, I'm healed now. I could potentially come back if I want
Interesting,
to.
yeah.
But I don't see that happening this season, maybe next year. But it's, I mean, to the point that you mentioned, he's definitely left a hole, even though last season he didn't really look like the same Rob Gronkowski until late in the year, and kind of the playoff run, he was great, but most of the year he was clearly limited. He was clearly dealing with some things. He wasn't as productive as he'd been in the past. But even that version of Rob Gronkowski, not having him on this offense is left a significant hole. The Patriots now, they have Ben Watson, and Ben Watson's been pretty good through these last 2 games, but he's 38 years old and he isn't anywhere close to the kind of weapon that Rob Gronkowski was. So if there's any addition that the Patriots make today, it would not be surprising to see them make it at tight end, especially if someone like OJ Howard or Austin Hooper becomes available, because those are players that can definitely help this Patriots offense, which runs so much more effectively when they do have that kind of dynamite tight end.
We're visiting with Zach Cox of Nesson on the trade deadline. Can't thank him enough for coming on. And you're at the forefront. And another guy, we're just talking about Josh Gordon, trying to figure it out. Another guy on that list for me is Michael Bennett. And you're at the forefront of that coverage. Tell us what you know about how that situation played out and why.
Yeah, it was just a situation where I think the Patriots brought Michael Bennett in thinking that they were going to run a certain type of defense, thinking that they were going to continue on with kind of the 4-3 based scheme that they've been running for the last couple of years, and that he was going to be basically the new Trey Flowers, because they lost Trey Flowers in free agency. Michael Bennett has a similar skill set. I think they were thinking that they would just plug into that spot and he would kind of continue with similar production to Flowers. Then they went out and brought Jamie Collins in. And after that, after seeing how talented and how I think surprisingly talented Jamie Collins was when he came back, and also with a couple of other moves in there, they're now running a 3-4 based defense, and Michael Bennett just doesn't really fit into that kind of scheme. I think the Patriots tried to sort of shoehorn him in at the beginning of the season. He played something like 37 snaps in the season opener, but every single week his snap count continued to go further and further down, with guys like Danny Shelton and Adam Butler and Dietrich Wise kind of elevating above him on the depth chart, which was surprising to a lot of us considering the pedigree that Michael Bennett has. I mean, this is a guy who had 9 sacks and 30 quarterback hits, 15 tackles for loss just last season, but the role just wasn't there for him on this team. And I think as a veteran, a guy who's used to playing a lot, he wasn't happy with that. And it's understandable. It ended up reaching a breaking point. According to the way that Bennett described it, was that he had a philosophical difference or philosophical disagreement with Brett Bielema, the Patriots defensive line coach, and that ended up resulting in him being suspended for a week and then returned for a practice or two after that, and then he was traded. We talked to Brett Bielema on a conference call just a couple of hours ago, and he had nothing but good things to say about Michael Bennett. He was very complimentary of what he brought to the team, and it doesn't sound like it's a situation where they have much ill will toward the guy at this point. I think they both just view it as a situation that didn't work out the way that they were expecting it to. I don't know how Michael Bennett personally views all that, but it definitely seems like they realized that it was time to go and they let him go. I think this was a move that was probably for the best for both. So
you
sides.
had potentially, with those two personalities, incendiary situation, then you get a scheme change, and the scheme change works. So it's not necessarily a function of Bennett changing as a player all that much. And then that incendiary thing is perhaps triggered a little bit more with Bennett being in a different position. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And Michael Bennett played well too. When he was on the field, he was a productive player for the Patriots this season. There wasn't really a role for him in the kind of, from what he's been used to throughout his entire career and just his personality. I think it was a good idea to just sort of let him go do his own thing somewhere else rather than let that linger. I mean, they could have held on to him and hoped that he would just be kind of a guy who would play 10, 15 snaps a game over the course of the season and into the playoffs. And that probably would have helped them. That probably would have made them a better team. But I don't think that would be worth the risk of just kind of carrying all this discontent forward through the season. I think it was time for a clean break. And I think that both sides would probably agree with that.
Visiting with Zach Cox and Nesson, we're going to let you go here in a second, but I got to ask you about Tom Brady. And the first thing I want to ask you is, what about that Netflix appearance? I want to go back to that. I don't want to let it go because I think it's just so much cognitive dissonance. You know, I understand this is a guy in Tom Brady who has committed to Alex Guerrero to manage his businesses, right? Or help him with it. So anything is possible. But Brady's response when it came out to the media, which I think did a good job of following up, really, really hard to abide and resolve in your mind. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it was an odd situation here. What was that, last week or 2 weeks ago? I don't think that I definitely don't think that he did that appearance intending to take a shot at Robert Kraft. From everything that we've heard since then and everything that Tom Brady has said, and just they have a good relationship. I don't think that was let me take this little subtle dig at this guy, but he should have known better. I think the fact that he was, I don't know, anybody watching that clip immediately thinks, oh, that's like Robert Kraft. You have to. I mean, there's been a lot of Patriots fans that are like, oh no, it was different. The plot of the show is.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Right.
It's like, sure, but like, come on, you can do it. You can make you just have to know that this is going to be the reaction. And then you explain it. The fact I think he might've been done dirty a little bit by the showrunners. He hasn't come out and said that, but it seems like he didn't know. He shot it in front of a green screen, and he said he didn't know exactly what the kind of setting. Maybe he didn't know it was going to look like a strip mall kind of day spa like that. Maybe he thought it was going to look like something different. I don't know. I just think that it's a situation where if he didn't watch the clip before it aired, he probably should have. And if he watched the clip before it aired, he had to have known what the reaction was going to be. I mean, I don't think there's any need for kind of outcry over this at all, but it's something where Tom Brady, with as kind of savvy as he is, he should have known what the reaction was going to be.
Last thing, if Tom Brady is not with the Patriots next year, what's the reason?
I still have a hard time envisioning him going somewhere else. It is a possibility because he is a free agent after this season. His contract is set to void next spring, this is the first time he's played in a contract year since he joined the Patriots 20 years ago. So this is kind of uncharted territory for him and for the team. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me for him to kind of uproot his family and his brand to move to some other city for another 1 or 2 years at the end of his career, especially with all he's been able to accomplish here, unless he's saying, hey, I want to try to see if I can do it for 1 year without Bill Belichick or anything like that. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me. I can see him retiring. He's 42 years old. He seems to sort of have softened a little bit from the I want to play until I'm 45 definitely stance that he's had for the last couple of years. I don't know. It would be very surprising to me to see him sign with another team this spring. It would not be totally surprising for me to see him retire, especially if the Patriots do end up winning another Super Bowl, because at that point, what else does he have to kind of achieve at this level? I don't know. I have a very hard time seeing him playing for anybody other than the Patriots, unless something happens over these next few months that really sours the relationship.
If they do win the Super Bowl, does Belichick retire?
I don't think so. I think I don't know. He talked last night on WEI, the radio station up here. They brought up his quote from the Football Life documentary back in 2009, I believe it was, that he doesn't want to be like Marv Levy and be coaching into his 70s. He's 67 now, so he's getting close to that mark. They asked him about that, and he's like, well, maybe back then I didn't know exactly what 70 would feel like. So it sounds like he's still leaving the door very much open to continue on in his coaching career. And I don't know. I have a much harder time getting a read on Bill Belichick than I do on Tom Brady from this regard. Because I could see Bill Belichick retiring. I could see him coaching for another 10 years, basically just as easily.
Dude, I got to let you go because it's trade deadline. I got more questions. Great questions, actually, but I got to let you go. Thank you so much, man. I hope you come back.
Yeah, not a problem. I'd be happy to come back.
Thank you. That's Zach Cox of Nesson, and nice enough to come on. We had to have somebody come on, with the NFL trade deadline, but more specifically, we had to have somebody come on with the Patriots because I don't think the Patriots are what we think they are. I still don't. All right. What I was going to ask, I was going to ask him a couple of things, but one of the things I was going to ask him was, what are they going to do with the offensive line? Because to me, like when you're talking about Brady coming back in this situation, if they don't really, you're bringing in other parts, right? You're making changes and moves. And right now, none of them are involving the offensive line. All right. And there's no thing that's going to happen. We're waiting for this. We're not waiting for a guy that's going to come back and he's going to be a world beater and everything's going to change with the offensive line. So what Belichick does with the offensive line in relation to the trade deadline and next year, I think is not only a decision that Brady takes into account in his mind pragmatically, but it's just one more thing with Belichick, whatever happens. If it's negative, nothing happens with the offensive line. Clearly, when you talk about Brady taking less money and this, that, and the other to accommodate the Patriots, right? This is my perception as a total outsider. My perception is that it's all Belichick. It's all Belichick playing that card and not necessarily appealing to Brady about it or appealing to his agent Don Yee about it to take less and be a team player, but to Kraft. And ultimately, it's Kraft's responsibility when Brady isn't compensated like everybody else, and Brady's not going to push it, and he's smart. Now, add that into the Netflix thing, and I think Zach is spot on in his analysis. I definitely think something happened, whether it was Brady's team didn't screen it, or they didn't have Tom screen it, or they were done dirty, as Zach said, by the producers of the show. It's interesting, though, that Brady said nothing negative about the show. Nothing. And it's typical sports media. It makes no sense. Sports is the one part of our life, especially as it pertains to how things are portrayed publicly, right? That is completely different than most other aspects of life, because people can say, this guy in sports, athletes like Tom Brady, they can tell you, hey, this guy's not blue. And people just go along with it. The ultimate example is what I'm going to talk about here in a second. And let me put it in perspective for you. I've spent a lot of time researching. By the way, I want to wrap up the Brady thing. So I think what probably happened was it played out, right? Here's the thing. If it wasn't something where Tom was like, well, what can you do? Schadenfreude at Kraft. Because remember I said before, all of this stuff where Tom, is not a priority every year, thrown under the bus with Deflategate. Those things are cumulative. And I think at some point when this happened, Brady's just like, what can you do? Rather than, in private, in public, he just made up a lie. No, it's not. I didn't think it was like that at all. You're misinterpreting it. If Brady was really concerned with what Robert Kraft thinks, he'd be throwing the people who ran the show under the bus. Period. The fact that he was deferential to those people, the same people, producers, directors who said, well, we lost them when the Kraft thing played out. They hadn't shot it yet. And those guys are quoted as saying, well, we figured he'd never do it. Now, again, that begs the question. You're telling me that they would blatantly misrepresent the situation? Maybe that's why it was a green screen. That's possible. But then why doesn't Brady call them out? So there's something going on here. Maybe Brady's delusional. Maybe he wasn't he didn't screen it. His staff screwed up. Or maybe, hey, too bad. And then, just pretends it's opposite day to the media because he knows he can get away with it. But I wanted to transition that opposite day thing, getting away with opposite day. And that's never been more prevalent for obvious reasons than it is today. I actually was on Twitter last night. I did a bunch of tweets about Donald Trump's baseball career. I'd done a deep dive, and I mentioned a little bit of it yesterday here. And I ended up deleting the tweets because I screwed the thread up so much. God, I hate that. You're trying to tweet an idea or something that's longer than just one tweet. So you got to set it up and all that stuff. It's the most confusing, jumbled up crap ever. Ridiculous. But in a way, I think it's good because you don't end up going down the rabbit hole of replying to people in a thread that really makes sense. You spend more time on the front of your timeline, thinking of other things. So I usually respond to people by retweeting them and then making my point or whatever it is. But I wanted to transition Brady's ridiculous response to, I didn't think it had anything to do with it. And college football and basketball players not getting paid. Ridiculous. Absurd. I don't blame the New England media for going along with it. What are they going to do? Of course, they're winning. They win Super Bowls. They're an institution. They're an industry unto themselves. So many of the people, you got to remember, in New England, but in every market, like Alabama is a great example. Many of the people who are reporting, commenting, all that, make more money because of Nick Saban. I think I saw a stat where enrollment at the University of Alabama has gone up from like 20,000 in 2006 when Saban took over to like 32,000 since he got there. The whole state is mobilized like it's never been mobilized. And this is Alabama, which defines its identity on the University of Alabama football team, right? fascinating history. It's a subject that I'm working on right now, by the way, when it comes to how important sports is to the United States specifically. I know there's elements of this in other countries, but we have led the way in developing the idea that a stadium, a team, defines a collective identity of a community, right? It's that way in certain communities around the world, but we kind of pioneered that. And I'll give you an example. When you think about suburbs, right? America now is suburbs. You know, the urban core of cities has collapsed and disappeared, but it's still there. If you go to Indianapolis or Cincinnati, right? And you're driving around, you want to go somewhere, well, you got to go out suburbs. So you want to go and shopping and get something, go whatever. Friends live out there, all that stuff. Okay. So all you do is pass through downtown, and what do you see? Lucas Oil Stadium. Right. That anchors the identity of the community of people. They identify with this thing. Now, look at the 49ers, completely different situation, right? They're way down in Santa Clara. I mean, and they're called the San Francisco 49ers. It's not necessarily that different, right? If what I'm saying isn't true, that we absolutely identify more than anything as a society, you know, everyone around us, the cohesion of that, I think sports contributes to that as much as anything because of the consistency of athletic events, the spectacles in these stadiums. We're all coming together, and it's kind of a confirmation. Here we are. We're doing it again. We all like it. It's a free civil society. We all get along. You know, it's like a confirmation of that. How else would you get that? And although that takes place around the world, and it does much more so today than it used to, we kind of ushered it in, beginning at the turn of the century, at the turn of the 20th century, when Harvard built the first concrete reinforced or steel reinforced concrete stadium that the world had ever seen. And it's still being used for its original purpose. Harvard Stadium, first American football stadium ever built, 1903. And so that kind of kicked off that principle. Of course, it's not really applicable necessarily to the Ivy League as much as it is in Alabama or even Los Angeles in kind of a different way, but with the Coliseum and the Rose Bowl. But it's really prevalent in my hometown, Kansas City, or in Cincinnati, Indianapolis. So that's when I talk about how important sports is, that's kind of what I'm referring to. And when you think about a team that's winning the way the Patriots have won, and you're a media member who is making more money because of it, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, I don't think most media members think of it that way. Some of them have jobs because of Tom Brady. Some of the people asking him questions, I guarantee you have jobs because of Tom Brady, and Bill Belichick and Robert Kraft. That's reality. So it does, that explicates the deference to, you know, big time celebrity athletes and teams. And to a certain extent, why wouldn't people defer? But we can have extremes like Joe Paterno that end up creating catastrophes, human catastrophes. And that's what Penn State was. It really is remarkable. I mean, how many people do you think when they tuned in the Penn State game, well, the big national game they had with Michigan 2 weeks ago, had huge ratings, thought about Paterno? They actually slipped in some footage of Paterno. Well, how can you not? It's Paterno State, the father, Paterno, right? Paternal. So that's the grip that sports has on our society. And to a certain extent, I'm not saying it's, and for out here in LA, you know, it's not like it is in Kansas City. When you go to work in Kansas City on Fridays, you wear red. I'm not making that up. Life is built around the Chiefs when they're winning. Now, when they're losing, not the case. I've been through both, experienced both. Once upon a time, Kansas City was very much a baseball town. When I grew up and went through high school, my senior year in high school, we won the World Series, 85. And it was the same thing, the way it is with the Chiefs today. But if the Chiefs lose over an extended period, that does go away. So it really does change behavior to a certain extent, or at least it explains a lot of the things that are going on, like college football players not getting paid. Think about it. First of all, where does college football emanate out of? Shh, don't tell anybody. The South. What happened with football was it was invented in the Northeast in the Ivy League by Yale. And then Harvard built the first stadium. And Yale followed that up with the Yale Bowl, which today is the first modern type stadium that we have in the United States. That, you know, our all of our football stadiums owe their existence to Yale Bowl and Harvard Stadium, obviously, but really Yale Bowl, because it was built as this, you know, Coliseum, seating 70,000. And it was built through the use of seat licenses. The Yale Bowl in 1912. 1912. So what ends up happening? What ends up happening with football is the Ivy League becomes what we have in the SEC or the Big Ten today. That was the Ivy League up until about 1930. I'm not exaggerating. And football was treated at places like Harvard, Yale, Princeton in the same way that schools today treat those high-profile college football athletes. How do we know? Because there were big exposés, and I tweeted some of them at the time, dating back to the early 1900s, the 1904, 1905. We had somebody on yesterday who mentioned it. I think, who was that? Who mentioned one of the big reports on all of the Ricky Volante, all of the abuses. They're actually compensating players. Well, that those big stories and exposés and investigative reports, those were coming out in like 1904 and 1905. I'm not exaggerating. I've tweeted them. So it literally was that kind of a situation. There was like a 1905 expose on college football in general. This guy had spent like 6 months and wrote this huge story for Harper's, which is like, we really don't have magazines today, but like the Daily Beast or something. And he had found out that a Yale alum who owned a cigarette company had given money to a Yale football player. And he had given this Yale football player like a ton of cigarettes to sell on campus. That was part of the scam that Yale, and Yale actually is the birthplace of American football. Walter Camp invented football. But if you go on the Yale campus today and you look at that Walter Camp statue, the father of football, right? The birthplace of football. The only reason that statue exists is the University of Georgia paid for it. The University of Georgia, beginning in the 1910s, struck up this sister university relationship based on football. Georgia and Yale played a home and home for decades. And Yale, for the first time in the history of the school, went below the Mason-Dixon line in 1929 and opened the stadium that Georgia has today. That Sanford Stadium, when it opened in 29, the first game was against Yale, against the Yale Bulldogs. The Yale Bulldogs that Georgia owes its nickname to, the Bulldogs. That's why they're the Georgia Bulldogs, Yale. So now, and the president of the University of Georgia in the 1920s raised money to erect a statue commissioned a statue for Yale out of appreciation for Yale's contribution in, bringing Georgia to the national stage, in terms of media coverage, acknowledgments from the rest of the country because of Georgia's football team. That was because of the relationship with Yale football. And so that statue of Walter Camp on the campus of Yale University was not funded by anybody associated with Yale. Amazing. So now think back to, and this all plays into the college football discussion. Yeah, man, do I love this show. Do I love Fancred for letting me do this show. This is so awesome, that I don't have to look at the clock. I'm looking at the time when we have guests, but, oh man, this is great. This is Brooks Melchior, by the way. I'm in Los Angeles, and I'm happy to be on your phone or tablet now, in your pocket every day. You can pull me out. Oh, my God, Brooks is on. Or we archive the show, of course. And on my Twitter timeline, you can watch it there. But we're covering the big stories. We just, just got the lowdown on the scoop from something. I mean, Zach was outstanding. Zach Cox from Nesson. And we've got more guests, topical guests coming up this week. Dennis Dodd is going to join us, one of the top college football writers, I believe tomorrow, but there's others. So we're following that stuff, but this stuff, like what's happening with college football right now and why is it happening? That's what we're covering as well. And if you don't know already, the board of governors for the NCAA is meeting today in Atlanta specifically to formulate a scheme, not a strategy, a scheme to obfuscate, right, and misinform the public on the nature of college athletes receiving compensation for their name, image, and likeness while they play college sports. They want you to be misinformed on it. It's just like, I'll give you an example. Just like when they have all the propositions on the ballot, and now you just assume, you don't even listen to those commercials anymore because you know what's ever on that commercial about Proposition 46 or Proposition D, that how it's being portrayed on the commercial is the opposite of reality, right? That's what you hear when you hear the schools speak through the NCAA, because that's what the NCAA is. It's the schools. Make no mistake. They don't want you to make that connection. But more than ever it is. How do I know? When was the last time a major college football star was ineligible because of NCAA violations? You can't name one. I mean, in my lifetime, as I think back, there weren't many times there haven't been in my life, my adult life, where if you asked me that question, I could give you a name in my memory banks because it had happened within 10 years or something, or it was, a big time situation. Not anymore. Not anymore. So more than ever, the NCAA is a total one-to-one representative of the school's interests. Mark Emmert, as I've said on the show before, we live in an age now where college presidents are free agents and they hop from school to school to school to school. The guy who pioneered that is Gordon Gee. He's still going. I think he's been at Ohio State twice, Vanderbilt, Colorado, now at West Virginia. He was Mark Emmert. This is a college president, E. Gordon Gee. And you talk about an advocate for big-time college football. Jesus. But he is Mark Emmert's mentor. And Emmert, of course, lived in that world, trafficked in that world by being the president at Colorado, Washington, and LSU when Nick Saban was there. That's the president of the NCAA right now, Mark Emmert. And, there's certain characteristics you must have in your personality if you're going to be in that role. Namely, you have to be pathological. You have to have the ability to look in people's eye and lie to them. That is, I think, the number one characteristic of most major college football teams. Not necessarily to the public anymore, because they really don't have to lie to the public anymore. Nick Saban's a great example. But when it comes to recruiting, that's all they do is lie, misrepresent what's going on. So part of this issue with the California law isn't just compensation, and this is important, isn't just compensation coming from outside the university, which is where it's coming from, for endorsements, because that's what the law allows in California beginning in 2023. That law also allows for an agent. And man, is that overdue. I mean, it's so overdue. It's like one of those things in your life that's so bad that happened to you in your life that you've just shut it out and you actually forget it. The fact that a 16-year-old kid from Memphis, Tennessee, is in a classroom by himself with Nick Saban, and Saban is recruiting him. The door is closed. He's on his own. That's how it works. Media is nowhere. His parents are nowhere. Representative is nowhere. That's how it works. And if you get a representative, Nick Saban calls him a pimp in public, which he has. He's called agents pimps. Anybody that would look out for someone who I'm trying to lie to is a pimp. But what that really means in an agent is someone to represent you when you're making arguably the most important decision of your life. And you're dealing with someone who is telling you things that aren't true. Namely, it's a 4-year scholarship. No, it isn't. I can cut your ass the first 5 minutes you're on the campus if I'm Nick Saban. And if you don't like it, I'll blackball you and prevent you from catching on with another school, right? So be sure to tell everybody you're hurt when you transfer, when we take your scholarship away. That's how it works, period. And that's in large part why Alabama is so good, because it's a professional, well, it's already professional sports, but nobody gets paid, right? The people who create everything don't get paid. So when you say professional football, it's applicable in many different ways. As an example, the roster, at least at Alabama and other schools that practice this. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of coverage. There used to be a lot of coverage on what's called gray shirting, which was essentially cutting players. You sign a certain number of players, and for whatever reason, you don't like them, not good enough, they get hurt, you cut them. And that's what Nick Saban does. And you maximize the talent on your roster. And so when you're playing a team that doesn't do that, and there are coaches that don't do that in the SEC, right? And you're 3 deep at every position. Oh, Gary Danielson, this Alabama team is so deep. Yeah, no kidding. But let's say the other team isn't, because they don't gray shirt. What happens in the second half? What happens in the fourth quarter when the team that doesn't gray shirt is still playing that starter? And Saban has rotated 3 guys at each position. That's why Alabama's so good. Does Alabama play artful football? Hell no. Hell no. I mean, when you look at that system, it's all Nick Saban. Offense or defense, he's a defensive guru, but offense too, right? That's why they have so many assistants coming through, and they're consistent. That's why they have so many assistants coming through, and they're still consistent, because it's just his system on both sides of the ball. And he's a hack on offense, just like Paterno was at Penn State. Saban's a better coach than Paterno was. Paterno, how did he stay at Penn State for so long? I mean, he won consistently 9-10 games a year. But what really happened with Paterno was about how did he coach for 60 years, get away with what he got away with, build what he built, which is pretty damn astonishing. Joe Paterno did that through ESPN, the rise of ESPN and the explosion of money in the mid-1980s when the college football powerhouses sued the NCAA to take over control of television and negotiate it themselves. Now the NCAA only negotiates basketball. They have nothing to do with football. Why do they even have authority over football? You see how ridiculous it is? How it doesn't make sense? But if I say that to you, there's a pretty good chance you don't know that. So what is the NCAA doing commenting on football? This should be the schools, because the NCAA is the schools. There's no difference. So, but in the case of Paterno, you had a perfect storm. You had ESPN starting around 1980. And then in 1985, Georgia, Oklahoma, all the big powerhouse schools formed this organization called the CFA, which they got rid of later. You've never heard of it now, but they used that organization essentially as a new NCAA, and they sued the NCAA to control football. And it went to the Supreme Court, and the big powerhouse college football factories won. And so now they control all the money in the sport. And because of, to ESPN's credit, and cable, the amount of money involved, the NCAA was not allowing more than a couple of games a week to be aired because they were consumed with control over it. Walter Byers was at the time, who was running the NCAA. And so when they lost control, Walter Byers retired. He got out and wrote a scathing book about college sports and how bad he felt. It was a book to settle scores, really, but how bad he felt for the exploitation of athletes. That was the pretense to settle scores in his book. So that's when the NCAA shifted from being a quasi-independent organization. Once they lost that lawsuit and college football schools took over television, everything changed. And that's when ESPN exploded. To this day, college football is the most important facet of ESPN. Financially, everything, brand, you name it. Because it is prevalent in every region of the country, pretty much every region of the country. Ironically, not in the Northeast, right, where it started, as I just told you. But all of these things that I'm telling you, but to finish my thought on Paterno. So there's, of course, why wouldn't people think he's the all-time winningest coach? And, they had good teams that won 2 national titles, thanks to Jerry Sandusky. Every success that Paterno ever had that is, widely acknowledged, national champions, directly responsible was Jerry Sandusky. That success was a function of his defense. He was a savant coach, a savant schemer on defense, and a great recruiter. And the minute that went away, Paterno saw that going away, he pushed him out. The same Paterno, I might add, that when Sandusky started his charity, remember, for the kids, to prey on the kids, the Second Mile charity, he started that charity in like the 1970s. Sandusky did. And when he started doing benefits, Joe Paterno, who by then was a big celebrity, national celebrity, appearing on Bob Hope, famous entertainer, 20th century, used to do this Christmas show, and they'd bring in coaches and players, and he would always be on. Bob Hope, with, he had the unique look, the Coke bottle glasses, and he's a coach who has a life outside of football. That's the irony of him staying so long, telling his players, you got to have something going on outside of football. Oh, really, Joe? What are you doing? But Paterno started bringing in big celebrities for Jerry Sandusky's charity events. How do I know? Because I went back and looked. That's what I've been doing. Part of what I've been doing, not just that, but learning things like that. I went back and looked at the old student newspapers, and oh my God, Bob Hope is flying in to do Jerry's charity event, his golf tournament. Right. That went on for about 10 years, and then it stopped. And that particularly stopped. And eventually, towards the end of Sandusky's coaching career, he couldn't raise enough money just to operate it. It was a joke, right? But Jerry Sandusky was among the best known people in the state of Pennsylvania and to college. Everybody knew who he was in college football, certainly, if you were around. And then he just poof, disappeared. But ESPN created Joe Paterno, the mythology of it. And Paterno, to his credit, used that celebrity to raise untold hundreds of millions of dollars for Penn State. Paterno's key to keeping the job at Penn State through all the time at the end. And that's the big reason Penn State, the reason that they were reticent about firing him, had nothing to do with his ability to coach football. Nothing. Because he was a hack. You saw what happened after Sandusky left. What did they win? Nothing. The key is, and the reason his name is still on the library, which it shouldn't be, but hey, I'm glad to know that Penn State, they're good with Joe Paterno. His name is on the highest profile building on campus right now. Hey, but at least we know how y'all feel. Don't care. Can't believe anything you say. It's the truth. It's like it never happened. But Paterno being able to keep his job as long as he did and run the program in the worst possible way, was because of fundraising, period. But if you think about the way he ran the program, I can tell you, you may not remember, or you may never have known, but the signature principle that people connected to Penn State, if you were in the media, or let's say you were a big college football fan, really into it, or a Penn State fan, the signature facet of Joe Paterno's tenure at Penn State was the remarkable loyalty of his assistants. To this day, in the history of sports, I mean, his entire staff stayed there upwards of 40 years with very few exceptions. McQuarrie was one of the very few exceptions, right? And what a surprise. A guy comes on board, one of the few guys who's not a fossil, like Sandusky, I might add, right? Who didn't get the memo, apparently. Next thing you know. But so you had that lengthy tenure of all the assistants, and then you had the ability, because of what he represented to the community and the school, right, with Paterno, you had Paterno running the program like the Kremlin. And the woman who broke the story, Sarah Ganem, called it the Kremlin in her reporting before she broke the story, that it was like the Kremlin. It was so secretive. Right. Sarah Ganem, of course, you may know or not, broke the story. She was a reporter in Harrisburg. And the only person in Pennsylvania who didn't get the memo the day it went out that you're supposed to cover for Jerry Sandusky. She was like 2 or 3 levels down the roster on the police. She was on the police, literally is what they called it, at the Harrisburg newspaper, Harrisburg Patriot News. She was a crime blotter reporter when she broke that story and won a Pulitzer Prize. And that's the only way it could have happened. It had to be someone who wasn't plugged into the culture, which now speaks to why we're discussing something that is, impossible to reconcile when you go to school in the United States and are told all these things about, all men created equal, but everybody has an opportunity. You can free will, all that stuff. You can do anything. And look, I still believe it. I think everybody still believes it to a certain, well, maybe not. I shouldn't say that. It's my experience. That's not fair. But in lieu of all that, it makes sense that a guy could play a life-endangering sport that everybody knows is life-endangering and not have health care guaranteed in writing. It's one of the highest profile professions in our country. The whole world is watching you. You're risking your life, literally, maybe not at that moment, maybe, sometimes, but we know down the road, you most certainly are, the longer you play, but it could happen rather quickly. And your health care is not guaranteed. And if you want a second opinion, well, we're not sure about that. If I'm UCLA or I'm Arkansas or I'm Penn State, our doctors are the best in the country. You can trust us. Don't worry about it. That's the situation you're in, unless you have somebody giving you great advice, a representative maybe. The representative that Nick Saban, if he found out, would call a pimp, would call a press conference and then call your representative a pimp. Think about this. Nobody brings it up, but there's an agent, an NFL player agent who I know, who's been texting me since the Tua injury happened, Alabama quarterback. And I've known him forever. And he's always talking about this because he has NFL player agent. And so over the years, this agent he's told me periodically, just reminded me and pointed out many NFL players who have chronic injuries or have their careers shortened because, and he singles Nick Saban out, but there are many, most coaches, right? Because college football coaches force medical treatment or pharmaceuticals or whatever the methods are that ends up further injuring a player. If you look at running backs from certain schools and their health, particularly their joints, when they get to the NFL, they're already like 50 years old in their joints. And when you see running backs break down seemingly overnight, you're like, wow, where did Larry Johnson go? Remember how great he was? And it just stopped, right? I'm not saying this is the case in that situation at Penn State, but when that happens, one of the reasons is that they've been overworked in college, but they've also been injured and forced to play or not given treatment or, surgery, whatever it is, with the long-term health of this guy in mind. The surgery, and Tua is the best example. The surgery he has gotten the last 2 years, surgery that they performed within hours of the injury. Hours. If that's not a red flag, I don't know what is. But he had surgery, and it was this, put it this way. And we just had Ross Dellinger on last week to talk about it because he kind of broke it, what was happening. The surgery Tua is having right now for his ankle sprain is this innovative, revolutionary surgery, right, that nobody else does. And they've released these animations of how it works, and they call it a tightrope surgery, right? And meanwhile, I think his name is and correct me, Cam, if I'm wrong on this. I think his name is Dr. David Chow, the pro football doc guy. We should try to get him on. I'd want to talk to him about this because he wrote a column about this. Yeah, Dr. David Chow. He's one of these guys now. We're getting this industry, and you'll start to see this. It's coming. You're going to have doctors now on NFL broadcasts like we have referees. That's coming. And the guy you're probably going to see first is Dr. David Chow. Follow him on Twitter. But he also writes a column for the San Diego Union Tribune. So what do I mean by that? He's the guy when somebody is limping on the field, completely guesses what it is, but he's really good. He's an orthopedic surgeon, and he lays scenario. I'm not criticizing him. He's great, but come on. But if you've been around long enough, like he has, and seen all those injuries and seen the symptoms, so that's what he does. And so he's the only guy. Again, this is probably going to be the first guy to get on network television as a doctor, and it's coming for NFL broadcasts and maybe college. Maybe not, based on what I'm telling you. He's the only guy with this Tua surgery, and I'm going to ask Dennis Dodd about this. We'll see what he says. Because it's important, because a lot of things happen in the NFL that are attributed to, doing what Alabama and Nick Saban is doing with Tua right now. I'm not saying it's going to result in that, obviously. But last year, he has the high ankle sprain, and they instantly give him this innovative surgery that Dr. David Chow, in a column in the San Diego Union Tribune, maybe I should look it up and read it to you, or at least get that information. But no, he wrote a column in the San Diego newspaper saying nobody does this surgery. He's an orthopedic surgeon. He knows the industry. Nobody does it. And, well, it might be good. It got him back on the field. And I will say this, it's not surgery on the same ankle this time. It's the other ankle that he hurt. But it's surgery designed to get the guy back on the field. That's what we want, right? But is it creating more risk for the future? There's no way of knowing. That the doctor who's performing the procedure, he can't tell you because it hasn't been done. I mean, it's been done a little bit. And I think it was in Dr. Chow, or maybe it was Ross Dellinger, I think, from SI, when he did he broke the story about the surgery. We had him on the next day. Here, Ross Dellinger of Sports Illustrated, national college football writer. But he reported in his reporting on the subject that a lot of college football teams are utilizing this surgery, including Auburn. So, but those are the kinds of things. I mean, if that's not going to happen in the NFL, it's going to be something a surgery like that is going to be vetted. You're not just going to have an outlier doctor or two. It worked for Alabama with Tua to a certain extent. It worked. I mean, put it this way. You saw Tua, or if you watched the SEC championship game, the surgery last year was designed to get him onto the field for the SEC championship game. How did he play in that game? Ask Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts had to come in and rescue him, right? And then, how did he play against Clemson? Right? So, perhaps this tightrope innovative surgery didn't help as much as we thought it did. I haven't heard people talking about it in that context. Now, he has the same injury on the other ankle. He had the injury last week against Tennessee. And they rushed him into surgery again. And now he's going to be ready November 9th, apparently, against LSU. But based on what we know from the past, will he be the same player? No. He wasn't against Georgia. He got pulled for the only time in his career. So when he had time to rest, rehabilitate after the season, he played much better than he played against Clemson and Georgia. Now, granted, those teams are great, so it's different. They haven't played. Alabama right now has not played a team this year that is in the top 25. Okay. Welcome to a 9-game preseason. That's college football. That's the way it is. That's how it's set up. So when you look at all of these things, the ability that the coaches have to do what Joe Paterno did, do what we're seeing with injuries, maybe I'm being unfair. The jury's still out. We don't know. But I know at least one NFL agent. I've known him for 15 years. And that's one of the recurring things. It's funny because he texts me about every other week and points a player out who's hurt. This is like a thing he's been doing with me forever. And this is the first time I mentioned it publicly. Right. And I'm mentioning it in the context of what is undeniably, irrefutably exploitation of your fellow Americans in more ways than one. And on the medical side, it's no coincidence that it's happening because the players don't have health care that's guaranteed. They're totally beholden on the schools. How's that going to work out if you get hurt? How do you think it's going? You've got Nick Saban over here. Oh, and he has a statue. Have you seen his statue? Oh, it's over there. Can't miss it. Oh, yeah, the statue with all the people around it taking pictures with. Think about that. If you're a player or you're a recruit, you're 17 years old from Indianola, Mississippi. Okay, a statue just walked into my school. A statue. You're going to say no to a statue? That's the whole point. That statue that was built for Saban, like, we do it for every coach that wins a national championship at Alabama. Fine. That's the pretense. That's the pretense to help recruiting, because that's what it's all about. It's about recruiting. Everything that goes on. And when you talk about the money that college football makes, they make more money than baseball and the NBA. College football. It's number 2 to the NFL. And it's ESPN's true bread and butter. The NFL isn't. It's college football. You ask yourself, where the F is that money? Right? It's in the locker room at LSU that they just created a spaceship out of, right? And you saw it on YouTube. And they couldn't wait to tweet it. I'm not singling out LSU. It's that way everywhere. The same locker rooms. Every major Power 5 school in college football, when you walk into their locker room, right, it's got to be as opulent and state-of-the-art as possible. And what's the other thing that you're always going to be aware of, and that's reiterated and reinforced? Every locker room in college football and football facility has a wall dedicated to NFL helmets. And then underneath the helmet is the names of the players from that school that have played on that team or that are current on that team. It's one of the first things you see when you walk into big-time college football facilities. NFL helmets right in front of you. That's how you recruit. That's how Urban Meyer, specifically Urban Meyer, recruits. That's how he's so successful. And Saban, of course. That's the number one focus. Right? Quality of the facilities is number 2. Facilities, recruiting, appearances. That's Oregon. It defines Oregon, right? But that's where the money that's being stolen from the players is going. Georgia, I think, just put up some $25 million. And if you're from Georgia, you're watching the show, go ahead and comment and let me know. But they just built some sort of like $25 million, because I was just down there at the University of Georgia and heard about it. They're building some like $25 million reception area that's connected to the stadium, because Sanford Stadium at the University of Georgia is in the middle of campus. The players practice about 3 miles away. In the locker room, the players dress in a locker room that's like 3 miles away. They bust down to the stadium for games at the University of Georgia, and but they're building like this monstrosity that's designed to host recruits in an opulent, private setting. You're not invited. Just like if you're a student at Georgia, you may help pay for the athletic department. You're not paying for scholarships. Those are private donations by design, right? But if you're a student, you're paying the cost of operating the athletic department with your fees And you're wondering, why are they raising them that's why. And if you're at like a MAC school and you're a student at Bowling Green, how many MAC games have you seen where the stands weren't empty? I don't ever remember seeing a MAC game where the stands weren't empty. And we're all pretending they're not empty on a Wednesday night on ESPN. The ability to continue that financial disaster, catastrophe, is fueled not by tax dollars, by student fees. And so if you look at student fees among the schools that are in the MAC compared to schools around the country, much higher, to the point of absurdity, right? And that's why, in my opinion, that is one of the reasons, the ability to have that get out of jail free card for these college football programs to a certain extent, is why, for instance, the Big Ten sucks. Where is the entertainment value of football? It's gone. It doesn't exist. In no context is Northwestern fun to watch, entertaining. Nothing. I'm watching SMU, play Houston. It's an entertaining game. And for all I know, those teams, they could beat Minnesota. They could. I know SMU and Houston could beat Northwestern, but that's across the board. And nobody points it out. I mean, football is supposed to be fun to watch. It's supposed to be entertaining on the field. It's not, in college football, especially, for the most part. What's funny is it's spun in such a way. And look, we don't even know we're doing this because this is so endemic to our culture. We don't even know. You don't even contextualize it that way. But I see it because I sit around and think about these things. But when I see Mike Leach do what he does with no talent, right? That's a red flag. Mike Leach has a high school team and they just won the Pac-12. Okay? What the hell's good? That's what I'm talking about. So when you have no accountability financially, this is what happens, right? And so that's why a game can be brutal, but if it's close, I remember, and Cam, you may remember this, maybe you don't. The first game of the year, and we're going to get to the clip. We're going to get to the clips tomorrow because there's developments going on right now. And this is all background for what I'm going to talk about primarily tomorrow. It's all about the NCAA. Let me finish my point about first. Do you remember, Cam, the Miami, Florida game to start the season? How horrible it was. It's like the worst game I've ever seen in my life. But, it was a good game because it was close. And so they talked to Dan Mullen after the game. He wasn't upset that they played like crap or that it was a god-awful game. Did you see Dan Mullen after the game? Oh, no. Great game. I remember he said specifically, college football is back, babe. Oh, yeah, it sure is. Yeah, it is. And, Florida is a great example. I mean, Felipe Franks is god-awful. I mean, Trask comes in, their quarterback now, has never been a starter, didn't start in high school. Right? How's that happen? I just explained it to you. But all of these things, right, now, after 110 years of the NCAA, right, number one, nothing's going to happen. It's like the NRA with guns. You have to pry ripping the players off from our cold, dead hands. That's what this is. So everything that's going to come out tomorrow, because you're going to see this maybe a little bit. The NCAA now, I actually thought, well, maybe they're a little deferential after the law came out in California. No. They're using students now with this bullcrap student committee and all this stuff. Oh, yeah. They're getting ready, baby. And they're going to start with the disinformation campaign. Yeah. And we're going to cover it tomorrow. But now I just told you why. Why is it happening? Now you know. Now you know why the emperor has no clothes. And we don't even see it because it's been going on for so long. So that the NCAA, the schools, gets away with resisting, allowing college athletes who don't have health care guaranteed, aren't compensated for playing a life-endangering sport, that they're not allowed to get paid by a company outside of the school for the use of their likeness that the school is using to make money, but they're not allowed to. That, it's not even outrageous. It's not America. It's not America. It just isn't. I mean, everything we've been taught, but it is. So we'll be back tomorrow, and we'll have some more topical guests. We're also going to there's going to be news coming out in Illinois. The governor of Illinois now has endorsed it. The compensation for players through endorsements. We've had Chris Welch on. We're going to have him on again, the representative. We got Florida and Illinois are the two states, and we've got the guys who wrote the bills. They've already been on, but they just had a press conference in Springfield, I guess. What is that, the capital? With the governor and our guy, Chris Welch, and it just passed through committee. And so now I think there's going to be a vote on it. It's got to go through two houses, but it could happen in Illinois. We got Florida down. We're going to keep on covering that. And I want to hear from you guys. You don't have to worry about it. We're going to be here. All right. Not going anywhere. This is great. I mean, why would I go anywhere? To have this platform, to talk to the people that we talked to today, Bobby Burak of thebiglead.com, who's like the forefront of sports media stuff, but real, not crap, but the real stories. And that guy's got some opinions on him. And then we got the guy, if you're going to have a guy on, he's one of them from the media in New England. We had, let me see here. Where was Zach Cox? Zach Cox on from Nesson. That was great. He was good. I have to have him back, Cam. That was good. That was a good segment. With the trading deadline bearing down. So that's going to do it for today here in Los Angeles. So I want you to come back tomorrow. We'll be here between noon and about 2 Eastern time, 9 to 11 Pacific time, Monday through Friday. And for my producer, Cam Smith, this is Brooks Melchior saying so long. This has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.